this is anything but a man in a fursuit. There wasn't spandex, there wasn't Velcro, there wasn't anything but relatively cheap costume fur available, especially to an amateur who might be trying to pull off a hoax.
What Scott Nelson hears in his headphones is strange, disturbing, and unexplainable all at once.
You're convinced Bigfoot exists?
Yes. I've heard him speak. And you will hear him speak here in a moment.
Before you pass judgment on Nelson, let me tell you a little of his past. He retired from the Navy after a 17-year career as a cryptolinguist, intercepting Russian communications and decoding them. Currently, Nelson is a professor at Wentworth College in Missouri.
Because of what I did in the Navy, you know, spending years, several thousand hours speeding the human voice up and slowing it down, and I detected language in those vocalizations.
Those vocalizations were captured on audio tape in the Sierra Nevada mountains by a group of hunters in the early 70s.
Right here is a juvenile.
Nelson came across them a few years ago while helping his son write a paper on Bigfoot.
I said, Stevie, there's language here. And he said, Dad, how can that be? It sounds like a bunch of apes fighting to me. And I said, well, we have to slow it down like Dad used to do in the Navy.
Right.
But
listen for yourself.
I'm just going to let it roll.
Nelson says he instantly knew three things about the sounds he was hearing. One, that he was hearing a language. Two, that it was not human. And three, that it was not fake. It was at that point that he became a Bigfoot believer and researcher.
The number of reports have increased. I think it's becoming more and more accepted for people to come out and say, hey, I had this strange experience, it terrified me, and I need to talk about it.
First of all, it was a bright sunny day, as you can see. And you could see her muscles rippling in her shoulder, in her thigh, as she walks. Jerry Romney, the guy they said was in the suit, they stuck him with breasts. What would they do that for? Why go to the trouble? She left tracks in the hard-packed sand of the creek bed. 1 inch deep. We have pictures, we have casts, no question, inch deep. So we know that as she stood there doing this, she weighed 600 to 800 pounds. Fake that. Solid proof that that's not a human being in a suit.
There's a guy called Ron Moorhead who, for several years, had a cabin way up in the remotest parts of the Sierras of Northern California. And he was there one time with a friend, and every evening they used to hear some absolutely bizarre noises and calls, and they couldn't figure out what the hell it was. And so they took up a tape recorder one time, and this is what they recorded. It is very bizarre indeed.
We decided to record the sounds and put them on a CD and a cassette and make them available to people. We do believe these creatures are trying to communicate with us, though, and we, as we speak, are having the linguistics people look into it. They are very encouraged. What they're saying so far is that humans cannot mimic these sounds, that the range supersedes what a human can do. The tapes were shown by a previous study at the University of Wyoming to be spontaneous and no signs of being re-recorded or pre-recorded at altered speeds. So the idea of a hoax is very improbable as far as professionals are concerned at this time.
My name is R. Scott Nelson, and I'm a retired Navy cryptolinguist, a Spanish and Russian interpreter, and while I was in the Navy, I spent most of my time listening to the human voice on tape, transcribing thousands of hours, logged in recovering the human voice and getting it on paper. Never was in my entire time in the Navy, never was really that interested in Sasquatch. So it's when I first got involved in this research, I really did not have an agenda, and because I don't describe myself as a Bigfoot guy, I'm a language guy. And how it really began is one day when my son was about 12 years old, he had a day off from school when I still had to teach that day, so he went to school with me. And after I'd finished teaching my classes for the day, we were sitting in my classroom with my computer open, and he had a school project that he had to complete. And the assignment was just write a story or write a story or a little paper on anything that you have an interest in. So like all 12-year-old boys anyway, he wanted to either write it on UFOs, the Loch Ness Monster, or Sasquatch, Bigfoot. So we were Googling information on Bigfoot, and he said, "Dad, what do you think Bigfoots sound like?" And I remembered some 70s grade B movie that I'd seen many, many years ago, and I just let out like a whoop and a holler and whoa, you know. And he looked at me funny and said, "Dad, that's not what Bigfoots sound like." And I said, "Well, okay, let's see if there's anything on here on Google that we can find out what Bigfoots sound like." And I typed in I remember this very vividly. I typed in exactly Bigfoot sounds. And what it led me directly to is the BFRO website, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, and to a specific page on their website that had a prompt there for what was labeled samurai chatter. I said, "Well, this looks good." And so I clicked on that, and immediately heard something that mesmerized me. Vocalizations in which were evident language articulations. And I played it over again and over again and over again to the point where my son said, "Dad, what's wrong with you? What's the matter with you? What are you doing?" And I said, "Stephen, there's language in these sounds." He says, "What are you talking about, Dad? It sounds like two apes fighting." To me, that's what it sounds like. And I said, "I know it does at real time, but I can tell." And I know that the reason that I could tell is because I had spent so many hours with the headphones on, what we refer to as sit in the cans, listening to the human voice on tape, manipulating it, speeding the human voice up, slowing it down to recover, the different languages and getting it down on paper, transcribing it, what we call transcription. And I said, Stephen, there's absolutely, definitely language being articulated here, but it's not human. And he says, how do you know that? And I said, well, because of what I did in the Navy. I said, we need to get a hold of these tapes and slow it down like what Dad used to do in the Navy. And that's what essentially started me on this whole thing. I walked away that day knowing three things about these tapes. And first thing is that it was not a human. Second thing was that it was most definitely a complex language. And the third thing was that it could not have been faked. And so I began to doing a little bit of detective work, trying to find out, where I could get a hold of these tapes. And I began to read up on Bigfoot. I suddenly started to become a Bigfoot guy because I realized I had to find out as much about, this phenomenon that as I could if I was going to make any sense out of it. So I read every book I could get a hold of, and in none of them that were available at the time, I might have read 20 books, there was not even a mention that Sasquatch might have language, or that he was intelligent enough, and certainly it was never touched on whether or not they were sentient creatures or anything like that. They were, at that time, when we first got involved, the theory that was most dominant in the Bigfoot community was that Sasquatch was a remnant Gigantopithecus, a Gigantopithecus blackie, which is nothing more really than a gigantic gorilla, right? So there was never a mention or even a thought that this gigantic gorilla would have language, right? So, but I feel that our work has shown that they most certainly do have language. Whatever it is that's speaking on those tapes, whether it's Sasquatch or something else, whatever it is not human, but it has language. That I can say, that is a definitive thing that I can state. Now I have people say, well, how do you know it's Sasquatch? Well, where they were taped, it has to either be Sasquatch or some other alien race, right? But you have to go with the simplest theory first, right? Because of all of the other experiences that these hunters had up there at the same camp, right? It has to be a Sasquatch. So that's what got me started, and I eventually was able to track down who had taped these original tapes. Alan Barry taped his in 1972. Ron Moorhead taped his in 1974. And I eventually met with them in California. And after they heard and saw, some of the work that I had done on their tapes, their immediate reaction to that was, we've been looking for you for 35 years. Because we can't get anybody else to believe us. I says, I cannot believe that I am the first guy to detect language in these tapes. And he says, and they both looked at me and said, what are you talking about? We always knew. We've known since the beginning that these were creatures that were speaking to each other in a language that is incomprehensible to us. And I said, well, you're most definitely right there. There's a lot of witness reports that are not really talked about much, like at Bigfoot conferences, where there are UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings in the same proximity, same time and place, or close enough in proximity that the witness believes there is some connection there. I personally have had weird experiences up there at that Sierra camp with Ron and my son. Nothing UFO related, but some things that could be considered beyond the normal, paranormal experiences. Ron and the other hunters up there have seen, they've not seen, a UFO come down on land or anything like that, but what they have seen is orbs traveling between the trees, and they would see it travel through the trees and go up over different ridges and up over and disappear over a mountain. They've had strange sounds that Ron calls it, almost sounds like a tuning fork, like somewhere in the sky is a massive tuning fork that gets hit, and they just hear this vibratory sound, and almost to the point to where they can feel it, that continues on for several minutes and then finally dissipates. Things like that. I personally have not experienced that.
As you know, I'm connected with the Sierra Sounds, which were recorded in the 70s and had them analyzed at the University of Wyoming, and cryptolinguists deciphered language in them. And for over 40 years now, I've been researching this enigma and what they are, what could they be, and I've been into all over the world, actually, into Nepal and to Siberia and into South America a couple of times, looking at enigmas, and found some skulls down in South America which were not human. So my thinking was, can these be connected with possibly the Paiutes who warred with giants over in Nevada, and also the minaret skull, which was found in the Sierras, and the Martindale mummies, which are found in Yosemite. These are things that seem no one is approaching, but we have a lot of evidence of giants in and around North America. Hard evidence, if we can just dig them up, because I think most of them's been hidden in the Smithsonian or something, but who knows where they go. But these things are bigger, stronger, they're stealthy, they are cognizant creatures, and that's hard for a lot of people to believe because they live out in the woods. But they are, and why they have not befriended me, because I've never offered them a challenge or a confrontation of any kind, yet they're still around up there where I go. I tried to get up there a couple of weeks ago, but I dropped a log on my foot and couldn't make the hike. It's just an enigma what they are. The language factor is huge, and I think a lot of people are underestimating what that could mean for us as humans and who we are as humans. We are made in the image of God, and that gives us our cognizance and our sentiency. These things have the same thing, which we underestimated when we were recording them, when they were coming in real close to us. And why they are here and why they are staying so elusive is what I'm getting at and my challenge. A lot of people want to shoot them, but I'm for one, they got to know I don't want to shoot at them, or I would have already. So I had a lot of calls about the attributes they have. I just had one yesterday about a guy telling me he's seen one disappear more than once, and I've had that over the years. For a long time, I just shunned that off, but these things seem to have access to an attribute we don't understand, and that could be another dimension, which a lot of people get into, that they're interdimensional. If that's the case, I'm not sure we'll ever get to the bottom of it, because how do you get DNA off something? It can just fade away or get out of your three-dimensional world. But they are a remnant, I believe, of possible alien intervention. I believe that possibly aliens have, I know, visited this Earth before. I have evidence of that. We have evidence of that from South America. And they have been here. They could be here now, but these things, if they are a hybrid or a remnant of alien intervention, possibly altering the DNA of a great ape of some type, I'm pushing towards that right now. I'm not pushing towards it, but I'm trying to connect those dots. That could be it, because great apes is what they look like, but yet they have the abilities that even we don't understand, to talk, to move around stealthily. This is unusual. And other things, lights, and a lot of connection with UFOs in a lot of the reports that I've been getting and hearing. So that's where I'm going in a nutshell. My book, Voices in the Wilderness, explains my 40 years, or tells my 40 years of dealing with this. It comes with a CD. I also still sell the CDs, which were made a few years ago, but they have Al Berry's story, who started all this. He was the investigative journalist that came into the camp, and he was responsible basically for fostering the study at the University of Wyoming by Professor Curlin, who established the tapes that he had were credible. They were made at the time of recording. They weren't manipulated in any way. And it wasn't until 2008 when Scott Nelson, a cryptolinguist, retired from Navy as a cryptolinguist, deciphered a language within their morphine streams. And morphine streams are important. A lot of people sing yells in or say, was this a Bigfoot? Was that a Bigfoot? But what a morphine stream is a series of words that make up a sentence. And that's what these things have that we dealt with in the Sierras. They were able to talk. And we knew that at the time, but you have to have somebody professional like Scott Nelson, like Professor Curlin, saying that up front before anybody's going to buy it. So that lends a lot of credibility to what we have. At the time when I was recording them real close up, a little scary at first, but then after a while we realized they're not going to hurt us, so we pretty much relaxed a little bit with it and started having fun. Al Berry, though, went up there looking for the hoax, trying to uncover who could possibly be doing something like this. It's about 8 miles back into the wilderness from the furthest place you can drive. So it's quite an imposing trek to get in there, and for someone to pull something like this off, he just couldn't find out how they could have done it and leave nothing but their big voices or big tracks. We found a lot of tracks, too, and we cast several tracks. So, and we had sightings every once in a while, but again, at the time, we underestimated. We tried to set up camera traps. We tried to trick them in so many ways, but they seem to stay a step ahead of you. And like I say in my talks, they're one note ahead of the music, so to speak. Again, well, let me say, first of all, Al Berry, an investigative reporter that we allowed to come into this camp to do an investigation, recorded the sound you're going to hear right now. He's passed away last January, but he's responsible for a lot of the studies we have done on the sounds through the University of Wyoming and different areas. And anyway, without his input and without his involvement, I wouldn't be with you today.
Yes.
I was just one of the hunters that was up there. There were 6 of us involved, and we were all capturing these sounds with tape recordings. He got some really good
Where
sounds.
exactly were you?
Well, exactly, I don't usually say, but it was in the Sierra Nevada mountains between Lake Tahoe and Yosemite.
In the Sierras between Lake Tahoe and Yosemite is a very isolated area.
Well, there's a lot of wilderness there.
There's a lot of wilderness up there, and it's hard wilderness, too. It's not an easy place to be. And tell us a little bit about the conditions under which you heard the sounds and the first time you heard them.
Well, from the distance where we can drive, it's about an 8-mile trek in there, a pretty imposing trek, really, to get there. And the conditions, well, we recorded them over several different times, so we was involved with a family of these things that were coming around our camp, and grossly underestimated what they were at the time, and was capturing, the only thing we could capture was their sounds. We couldn't capture pictures many times as we tried. They just seemed very elusive, and they are very elusive. But,
yeah, that's been noticed.
Yeah, a lot of people wonder why. But anyway, I underestimated grossly what we were involved in at the time. I thought it was just a unique thing, and we was kind of having fun with it. But Al Berry was really trying to figure out if anybody could have been hoaxing us up there.
Yeah, that's exactly, of course, that's the major question with, frankly, with everything about Bigfoot. There are a lot of hoaxes.
Oh, there are, yeah. Well, there has to be a real dollar bill somewhere to be a counterfeit, I guess.
Yeah. So what did he do to try to eliminate the possibility that this might be somebody out in the woods trying to scare you?
Oh, he did. Well, first of all, to get there and to know when we was going to be there was a question he had to ask. But he was looking for anything other than the tracks they were leaving, trying to find any evidence whatsoever. We didn't know at the time that he was really going through our backpacks. He was looking for wires. He was looking for anything he could find that would suggest a hoax or somebody pulling our leg. And when he had them studied by the University of Wyoming, well, that kind of took out a lot of the doubt because because they discovered there was no 60-cycle hum in the recordings, which would have suggested they'd been pre-recorded, re-recorded. They talk really rapid, really fast. These things do, and
you say talk. You think of them as talking now. I notice.
Well, when you hear the sounds, they're talking, and we kind of knew that, but we didn't have a professional telling us that, and that's what you have to have nowadays is something behind your name, like a PhD or something, to get it qualified, and so that people believe, oh, okay, that's real now. Well, we kind of knew they were talking to each other. They were trying to say something to us. Later on, at the time in 1971 when this started, Al Berry didn't go in until 72, and he captured some recordings, which are the ones you'll hear now, and they were very clear, and those are the ones that the University of Wyoming studied. But it wasn't until 1974 when we really started interacting with them, and something that sounded like they were slowing down their rapid-fire chatter into something maybe we could understand. Don't know what they were trying to say, but a cryptolinguist has uncovered language in that, and he does have the qualifications to do that. He's retired from the Navy as a cryptolinguist from 20 years studying these, how to decipher codes and
is his
language.
Can you say his name?
Scott Nelson.
Oh, Scott Nelson, right. You said that earlier. I'm sorry.
He'll actually be speaking with me in Georgia in January, and him and I spoke together quite a bit because his programs shows how he deciphered the language and the qualifications he has to do this stuff, and so it's quite compelling and it's quite exciting. Really, it's been a big part of my life.
Well, yeah, because
40 years.
A professional dealing with that level of skill, which would be really very high, and saying these are not human sounds, and backed up by the University of Wyoming saying that they weren't pre-recorded in any way, that's powerful stuff. So let's listen to the next, which Ron calls Apollo question. Ron, why do you call it Apollo question?
Because it sounds like they're asking me a question. This is made 2 years after the other sounds you heard were made, and my friend Bill McDowell and I were outside the shelter, and usually they don't interact or come around until you're inside our little shelter. And we were outside, and these things were popping rocks and breaking limbs and whooping back and forth, and this was later on that evening when they started actually talking, I'm going to call it, because they were saying something. I don't know what it was, but I think it was a question directed at me, and that's what you'll hear. That's why I call it a question. Well,
let's listen, folks, and see if you can figure out what the question may have been.
Right there, I just seen movement right through there.
Ron, I have one question to ask you about that sound. What exactly were you doing, or were whoever recorded it and the people present doing, when that very aggressive sounding, almost human voice in places started?
Or inside a shelter, which we jerry-rigged around a group of trees with cables and deadfall, and I have a picture of that in my book, and we have a top over it, but in the top of it, Al Berry punched a hole so he could get his head up through there and try to see what was making the sounds, and every time he'd pop up, the sound would stop. And the Johnson brothers, who was in camp that night too, they walked up, and we were trying to interact with them. We kind of felt after a year or so of these sounds going on that they weren't going to hurt us. They weren't as aggressive as they sound. They're really, it's like a big dog barking at you, but he never bites.
Yeah.
These things were not trying to hurt us. So we felt a little bit of security there, and we was able to walk out, but every time we walk out towards where the sounds were, they would stop. And it's dark. Generally, it's right after dark when all this took place. A lot of times there's a bright moonlight, and the camp is 8,400 feet in elevation, so it's quite bright up there when the moon is shining.
Yeah, it's really bright up there when the moon is shining. You can read by it mostly.
But Al Berry was up with an infrared camera and all kinds of whatever he could take up there at the time. This was in the 70s, by the way, so
yeah.
Obviously, we didn't have the technology that's available today, but he was trying to capture something that was making the sounds. And although we've seen them, Al Berry never got to get a glimpse of them. He lived quite a distance away, and he didn't go up there nearly as often as all of us did. And we got to capture glimpses of them occasionally, but nothing defining that you could really say, other than they were 8 to 10 foot tall. And that's
yeah. Well, you should be glad then that they were just noisy and not really aggressive, because that would be pretty serious. Ron, let me ask you this, and if I may, what do you think they are?
There's a good question.
That's a good one, isn't it?
I have no idea. Well, I have my ideas, but
sure. Give us a few ideas.
Well, they could either be what a lot of scientists that I went to Russia last year and spoke over there at the Darwin Museum with a couple of professors, and I think their thinking is they could be a remnant of the Gigantopithecus, which they think went extinct in Asia, but maybe they didn't go extinct. And they were thought to be upright beings, perhaps, and 8 to 10 foot tall. And if they're a remnant of that, well, that's where they went with. Of course, there's a biblical view of giants in the Bible, and then you've got those people that think they're paranormal. There's a lot of enigma associated with these creatures, which remain unanswered for me. And I stretched out all over the place trying to find what they could possibly be, and I don't know. They are sentient, cognizant thinkers, which is hard for a lot of people to swallow, including the professors I've been around.
Oh, of course.
Because this language thing is only supposed to be for humans. Well, these things aren't human like we are, but they have language. And,
well, of course.
From my experiences up there, all the times we've tried to trick them, I do believe that they are cognizant thinkers. They can figure it out. They may not know exactly what that camera's going to do, but they know that it's not normal. I don't know. My thoughts are they span all the way from giants in the Bible, from Genesis 6:4 to Greek mythology to Gigantopithecus. So